The lights were hot, the cameras unforgiving, and millions of Americans tuned in across the nation. It wasn't just another presidential debate, it was the rematch the country never knew it needed. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump once again. But this time, the stakes were existential. Trump stood tall, grinning with the same bravado that had divided the nation for years. His words, as always, were sharp and unruly. The country was great before Biden showed up. Under me, we had jobs, power, strength. Biden, for the first half of the debate, remained composed. His eyes didn't flicker with the usual fire until Trump crossed a line. "You've been nothing but a puppet. You don't lead. You read a teleprompter written by people half your age." The audience gasped. The moderator tried to cut in. Biden raised his hand, signaling for silence. He adjusted his mic slowly, looked straight into the camera, and said, "You want to talk about leadership, Donald? You hid behind tweets. I sat in situation rooms while you played golf. You fired experts. I listened to them. You divided this country. I'm trying to rebuild it." A wave of stunned silence hit the studio. Even Trump raised an eyebrow. Social media exploded in real time. Biden just ended the debate with one sentence. But it didn't end there. Biden continued, calmer now, but firmer. "I may be older, but I've seen this country at its best and worst. And I will not let it fall apart, just so you can hear yourself talk." Trump tried to interject, but the moment was gone. The studio was no longer his battlefield. Biden had seized the narrative with words heavier than applause. Backstage, Biden's team exhaled in disbelief. "He did it," one staffer whispered. "He finally hit back." Outside the debate hall, crowds began to shift. This wasn't just a political event. It was a turning point. The silent majority, many of whom had lost faith in Biden's passivity, saw something different tonight. A fighter. The clip of Biden's fiery response was played on every major news network, replayed endlessly on social media, with captions like, "Grandpa Joe just flipped the script," and "Mic drop of the decade." But behind the online fanfare, the real impact was beginning to take shape. Not in memes or tweets, but in the corridors of power and the hearts of undecided voters. Inside the White House, aides gathered in the West Wing, analyzing early polling shifts with growing astonishment. "We're seeing a 9-point bump in under 35s, said campaign manager Lisa Martinez, pointing at the data on the screen. "They're calling him a quiet storm. This is unexpected." Biden, seated in his private study, wasn't celebrating. He stared at a grainy clip of himself on his phone, rewinding the exact moment he leaned into the mic and called out, "Trump." "Did I go too far?" he muttered. His wife, Jill, walked in with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "No, Joe. You finally spoke like a man who still has something to fight for." Meanwhile, in Mar-a-Lago, Trump was raging. "That was weak. That was emotional garbage," he bellowed at his advisors. "He got sympathy points. That's not a win." But inside, Trump knew Biden had struck a nerve, not just politically, but personally. The former president was used to dominating the room, the ratings, the headlines, but this time he was being outmaneuvered by a man he had dismissed as sleepy. Cable pundits went wild. CNN hosted a special segment titled "The Biden That Was Promised." Fox News tried to reframe the moment as scripted drama, but even their audience couldn't deny something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, the political winds had changed direction. On TikTok, Gen Z creators remixed Biden's quote with trending audios. On Reddit, a user posted, "That one line gave me goosebumps. Maybe there's still something left to believe in." Back in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Biden's hometown, people gathered at a local diner. "That's the Joe I remember," said an elderly waitress. "Not afraid, just honest." But not everyone was pleased. Inside certain corners of Washington, especially among the GOP elite, alarm bells were ringing. They had banked on Biden fading quietly into retirement. Now, he was rallying. One unnamed senator whispered to a colleague, "If Trump loses the narrative now, we're all screwed." And Trump? He sat alone that night, scrolling through reactions, searching for the one post, the one voice that would assure him it was all smoke and mirrors. But instead, he kept seeing the same line repeated. "You divided this country. I'm trying to rebuild it." That sentence echoed louder than any campaign speech he'd ever given. By the next morning, the political ecosystem was in a full-blown spin cycle. Biden's emotional stand had sparked something rare in modern politics: authenticity. But authenticity alone wasn't a strategy, and Trump knew that better than anyone. So, he did what he always did when cornered. He retaliated. From his personal account on Truth Social, Trump blasted out a furious thread. "Joe Biden is a fraud. That speech was staged. Sleepy Joe doesn't speak from the heart. He reads what the puppet masters write. Sad." Within hours, conservative media parroted the new angle. Was Biden's viral moment genuine, or a carefully rehearsed PR stunt? The narrative war had begun. Inside Trump Tower, a crisis team convened to craft the America First retaliation tour. The first stop, Des Moines, Iowa. Trump's stage was massive, drenched in red and gold banners, with "Make America Strong Again" in flashing LEDs. He walked out to "God Bless the USA," flanked by military veterans and coal workers. He didn't waste time. Joe Biden cries, and the media calls him a hero. But when I speak truth, they call me dangerous. That's the double standard. The crowd roared, but it was clear. He was trying to reclaim a voice he felt slipping away. Back in Washington, Biden's team watched the live stream in silence. "He's trying to bait you," Jill Biden warned her husband. "Don't fall for it." But Biden was already pacing. "I need to speak again. Not to fight. To clarify. To lead." That night, in an unscheduled press conference, Biden addressed the nation from the Roosevelt Room. No teleprompter, no scripts. "Mr. Trump says I'm a puppet," he began, "but I've held my dying son in my arms. I've seen this country bleed and heal, and I know the cost of words. I didn't speak to win. I spoke because it was time." The room fell into a hush. Reporters, so used to chaos and confrontation, sat spellbound. There were no applause lines, no slogans, just gravity. The next morning, a rare headline ran on both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal: "Two Americas, One Reckoning." Meanwhile, the public began taking sides more fiercely. Pro-Biden videos and pro-Trump counters flooded YouTube. TikTok trended with #BidenTruth and #TrumpFire. Social media, once a noisy theater of memes, became a battleground of ideals. Young voters, previously disengaged, now debated in classrooms and subreddits. Some saw Biden as a phoenix rising from political ashes. Others still rallied behind Trump's brash charisma and unfiltered rage. But in the middle, a growing group of voters who weren't choosing sides. They were searching for sanity. And both Trump and Biden knew these were the hearts that would decide the future. Behind the fiery speeches, trending hashtags, and dueling rallies, something deeper stirred. A silent war, not just of personalities, but of ideologies. And now, powerful forces were stepping out from the shadows. At a discreet roundtable in Georgetown, top advisors, Silicon Valley donors, and intelligence veterans met under tight security. The agenda: national stability in the age of political extremes. What was discussed wasn't broadcast on any network, but whispers reached the edges of both campaigns. For the Biden team, the meeting raised alarms. "They're preparing for post-election chaos," said Ron Klain, "and they don't trust either side." Trump's camp, on the other hand, called it a deep state rehearsal. The lines blurred. Who really held the power? In a leaked memo, Homeland Security officials warned of digital escalation and AI-driven disinformation campaigns reaching critical mass by fall. Bots were amplifying both Biden's empathy and Trump's fury, confusing voters, stoking tribalism, and destabilizing trust. Biden responded by forming a bipartisan cyber truth task force. He invited respected Republicans, ex-military officials, and even tech CEOs like Tim Cook and Satya Nadella. But Trump mocked the move. "Joe's forming a nerd squad to save America. Maybe next he'll ask Siri to lead the Marines." His crowd laughed, but in private, his team was nervous. Trump's base was solid, but the middle was sliding toward Biden. Then came the moment that shifted everything again. At a town hall in Pennsylvania, a young mother stood up. Her voice trembled. "My son is 12. He's asking me if America's going to be in a civil war. What should I tell him?" Trump's answer was swift. "You tell him to be strong, to be proud, and to never let the radical left take his country." The audience erupted, but the mother's face tightened. It wasn't the answer she needed. The clip went viral, and for the first time in months, even some of Trump's loyalists began to question. Was strength enough without empathy? Biden saw the opening and seized it. In Ohio, speaking at a veterans' hospital, he turned the mother's question into a national appeal. "I don't want our children afraid of their country. I want them building it." The crowd stood. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was a battle for America's soul. That night, newsrooms buzzed with a single question. Is this election about leadership or legacy? Because for all the fury and fire, one truth loomed quietly behind it all. Neither Biden nor Trump would be the same after this. And maybe neither would America. As election night approached, nerves frayed in both camps. But it wasn't the polls that frightened insiders. It was the shifting winds within their own circles. Trump's inner circle, once fiercely loyal, had begun to fracture. Jared Kushner kept his distance, Ivanka was silent, and rumors swirled about Steve Bannon's secret meetings in Europe with far-right strategists. Trump, sensing betrayal, tightened his grip. "You're either with me all the way," he told his top aides, "or you're out." Meanwhile, Biden faced a subtler storm. An email leak from a foreign intelligence group revealed that several Democratic donors had suggested Biden pass the torch to younger leadership, even naming Michelle Obama and Gavin Newsom as possible successors. The message went viral, and though Biden publicly shrugged it off, in private, he was devastated. "They think I'm too old to finish what I started," he told Jill, his voice unusually quiet. "But if I walk away now, Trump walks in." Jill placed her hand on his. "Then don't walk away." That night, Biden's team launched the American Tomorrow Tour, framing the campaign not around Joe the man, but Joe the mission. It was a masterstroke. Suddenly, the election wasn't about age, it was about stewardship. Still, something darker brewed beneath the surface. Anonymous sources from national security circles began leaking that a coordinated cyber attack, codenamed Operation Signal Collapse, was underway, targeting voting infrastructure in swing states. The source, an overseas entity with known ties to both pro-Trump influencers and anti-Biden trolls. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox began running breaking news banners. Digital threat to 2024 election, U.S. agencies on high alert. Biden called for calm. Trump tweeted, "Fake news." It's all a scam to steal the vote. Again! Behind the scenes, both men received urgent security briefings. And it was in one of those briefings that Biden looked at his chief of staff and said something startling. "If this breaks the country, I won't be able to fix it. Neither will he." The room went silent. It was the first time Biden had acknowledged that this might not just be an election loss, but a democratic collapse. Meanwhile, Trump's camp plotted their own countermove. A sweeping campaign of rallies, online content floods, and legal filings, all set to activate in the 48 hours before the vote. It had a name: the final wave. But not everyone was on board. A rising voice from inside the Republican Party, a young congressman from Florida, warned Trump in a private meeting. "You're not fighting Biden anymore. You're fighting the system itself, and systems fight back." Trump leaned in, eyes narrowed. "Then I hope they hit hard, because I'm hitting harder." In a nation already on edge, with towns boarding up windows and schools canceling post-election classes, just in case, one thing was now clear. This wasn't just about Biden versus Trump. It was about a republic trying to hold its breath. Before the storm, November 5th, 2024. Election Day. By dawn, lines had already wrapped around city blocks. In swing states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia, some voters had arrived as early as 3 a.m., clutching coffee in one hand and silent resolve in the other. It wasn't just another vote. It felt like a stand. In Miami, an elderly Cuban-American woman wore a homemade shirt reading, "I escaped one dictator. I won't welcome another." In rural Ohio, a young farmer drove his pickup into town with a giant Trump 2024 flag, honking at anyone who didn't cheer back. The tension was tangible, even in the air. News anchors used words like historic, unprecedented, and potentially explosive so often they began to lose meaning. And behind closed doors, both campaigns operated like war rooms. At Biden's HQ in Delaware, the team triple-checked turnout models and early voting patterns. Reports were cautiously optimistic, but no one exhaled. Biden sat silently, watching CNN on mute. Occasionally, he whispered to himself, "One more win. Just one more." At Mar-a-Lago, Trump's inner circle moved like a military unit. A row of flat screens showed real-time social media analytics, legal hot zones, and polling data. Trump, ever theatrical, wore a deep navy suit with a blood-red tie and smiled as if the presidency were already his. "It's not about whether we win," he told a reporter from OANN. "It's about making sure they can't steal it again." But by mid-afternoon, strange glitches began appearing. In Georgia, some ballot scanners temporarily went down. In Wisconsin, Wi-Fi disruptions slowed voting center updates. Conspiracy theorists jumped on it within minutes, and hashtags like "Judins rigged again" and "Stop the Steal 2.0" began trending worldwide. Biden's team sent out a composed statement. "Remain calm. Our election officials are trained, prepared, and vigilant. Democracy is not that fragile." Trump's team blasted a tweet. "Here we go again. Total disaster. Fraud." News networks scrambled. Rumors ran wild. Some feared violence. But none of that compared to what came at 7:42 p.m. Eastern. An anonymous drop on a whistleblower site claimed it had leaked footage from a classified Department of Homeland Security, DHS, briefing. The video showed a senior intelligence official warning about foreign interference in voter data transmission nodes. The clip was vague, poorly cut, and possibly doctored. Didn't matter. The internet exploded. Tensions that had simmered all day finally boiled over. In Philadelphia, protesters began clashing outside City Hall. Trump supporters chanting, "Count every vote," while Biden supporters held up signs reading, "Save Democracy." The National Guard was put on alert in 6 states. And still, the votes kept coming in. By midnight, the map looked nearly identical to 2020. Red heartlands, blue coasts, a few uncertain battlegrounds where every vote felt like a matchstick in a dry forest. And then something unexpected happened. Fox News called Arizona for Biden. Trump's camp erupted. Phones rang. Advisors screamed. Trump stormed out of the room. "Get Rupert on the phone. This is a betrayal." But Biden? He just nodded once. Quietly. Because he remembered what his son Beau once told him, years ago during a low point. You don't win by screaming the loudest. You win by showing up. And tonight, America had shown up. The only question left, what would it wake up to? By the time most Americans woke up on November 6th, the map was no longer red versus blue. It was chaos versus control. Biden held a razor-thin lead in the Electoral College, 270 to 268. Nevada had just reported its final batch of votes, and they had broken slightly in his favor. But Trump refused to concede. Not even close. He went live on Truth Social, broadcasting from a darkened room with an American flag draped behind him. His voice was slow, deliberate, eerily calm. They want you to believe I lost? I didn't lose. I won. We all know it. Within the hour, spontaneous protests flared in major cities. Trump loyalists marched with red hats and signs reading "The Big Steal, Part 2." Counter-protesters pushed back with slogans like "Trump lost twice, get over it." But the real shock came at 10:21 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, when Trump's legal team filed an emergency motion with the Supreme Court, claiming that irregularities in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada rendered their results constitutionally invalid. The country held its breath. And then, Biden stepped in front of a podium at the White House press briefing room. No teleprompter, no notes, just Joe. This isn't just about who won or lost. It's about whether we still believe in the system that lets us decide. I ran against Donald Trump twice. I beat him twice. He doesn't have to like it, but he has to accept it. His voice was hoarse. His hands trembled slightly. But his message cut through the fog like a siren in a blizzard. Then something unexpected happened. Republican Senator Lisa Hammond of Colorado, one of Trump's staunchest allies, went live on MSNBC. "I campaigned for Donald. I voted for him. But this isn't leadership. It's a tantrum dressed as patriotism." Her statement triggered a ripple effect. 2 more GOP senators followed. Then 3 governors. Then 10 state attorneys general. Trump responded with fury. He called them traitors, cowards, and fake Republicans. Meanwhile, reports surfaced that DHS was monitoring increased encrypted traffic among right-wing militia groups. The fear wasn't just a stolen election now, it was domestic unrest. In a classified meeting at the Pentagon, top brass discussed contingency scenarios. One of them, reportedly labeled Eagle Tempest, involved martial law if protests turned into coordinated insurrections. And through it all, Joe Biden sat quietly in the Oval Office, a man who had lost his wife, his daughter, and his son, but never his faith in the idea of America. He looked at a photo of Beau on his desk. "If I have to walk into that storm to keep this country from burning, then that's what I'll do." Outside the White House, thousands gathered, some with candles, some with fists. The line had been drawn, and no one knew what would happen next. It was November 8th. The air over Washington, D.C. was thick with anticipation, and something darker. The crowd outside the Capitol had grown to nearly 50,000. Barricades rattled, chants echoed, and drones hovered above like silent vultures. The Department of Homeland Security had raised the threat level to severe. Rumors swirled, militia groups on the move, armed protests planned in battleground states, and hacked media feeds broadcasting conflicting results. Then, as if pulled from the final chapter of a political thriller, every screen in America flickered. Phones buzzed. Smart TVs went black and rebooted. Even Times Square's digital billboards went dark. Then, a single, unified broadcast. On it, Joe Biden, standing behind the resolute desk, his tie loosened, his voice grave. My fellow Americans, we are on the edge of something dangerous, not because of an external enemy, but because of a lie that one man has repeated so often, some are ready to burn the Constitution to protect it. He took a long breath. Donald, if you're watching, and I know you are, this isn't about you anymore. This is about all of us. Stand down. Concede. Let America heal. The feed cut. Within minutes, Twitter exploded. Stand down, Donald, Joe Biden broadcast, and our crisis of democracy all trended globally. Some cheered the speech as Churchillian. Others called it authoritarian theater. But the country listened. And Trump? He responded the only way Trump could. From Mar-a-Lago, flanked by golden curtains and a defiant MAGA flag, he went live. This time, not with fury, but something stranger. A smile. Joe says, stand down. I say, stand up. You decide who leads this country. Sleepy speeches from D.C., or a movement that never quits. It was no longer a dispute over ballots. It was an existential showdown. In the following hours, military presence increased in major capitals. Facebook went down for maintenance, an unprecedented move many saw as a preemptive strike on misinformation. The New York Stock Exchange halted trading for the first time since 9/11. And then, a call. From Barack Obama to Biden, from Musk to the Secretary of Defense. Even Taylor Swift tweeted, "This isn't politics anymore. It's survival." America had stopped breathing. Until midnight, when Biden returned to the screen. This time, he wasn't in the Oval. He stood outside the Lincoln Memorial, lit by torches, flanked by civilians, not Secret Service. He said only one thing. You want to save America? Walk with me. And he walked. Down the steps. Into the crowd. Unafraid. Cameras followed. A sea of people. Black, white, rich, poor, red hats and rainbow flags followed behind him. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like hope. Camera slowly zooms in on the narrator against a backdrop of a flickering American flag. In a time where truth is blurred and power is a currency traded in fear, two men stood at the edge of history, one with a microphone, the other with a megaphone. But in the end, this wasn't about Joe Biden or Donald Trump. It wasn't about left or right. It was about a country deciding who it wants to be. Democracy doesn't end in fire or applause. It ends when we stop caring. And it's reborn when we choose to walk together again. America didn't fall that night. It stood up. And sometimes, standing up begins with simply taking one step forward.